much as to say, I should stay on or come back later. So I went back again and she said, I don't want to give up my surplus to the state. You're a good boy, she says, I know you won't give me away. You see, I'm not hiding anything from you. I would dig a pit myself, but you see what it's like outside. I've left it too late, it's winter, I can't manage by myself. If you dig it for me, you won't be sorry. So I made the pit in the proper way for a hiding place. Wide at the bottom and narrow at the top, like a jug, and we started a fire again and warmed and dried the pit with the smoke all in a howling blizzard. Then we put the potatoes into the pit and the earth back on top. A very neat job it was. Of course, I didn't say a word to a living soul, not even to my mother or my sisters. God forbid. Well, hardly a month went by before the farm was robbed. People coming past from Buskoy said the door was wide open, and the whole place was cleaned out. No sign of the widow, and Gorlan had broken his chain and bolted. A bit later still, there was a thaw just before the new year. On St. Basil's Eve it rained, so the snow got washed off the high ground, you could see the bare soil. Then Gorlan came back to the farm and found the place where the potatoes were buried, and started rooting up the earth. He dug and threw the earth back, and there were the old woman's feet sticking up out of the hole, in those shoes with elastic straps she used to wear. Horrible. Everyone in Varetaniki was sorry for the old woman. No one suspected Karlam, and can you blame them? It was unthinkable. He wouldn't have had the nerve. If he had done it, he would have run away, far from here. The Kulaks, in the village, were very pleased about the murder. Here's a chance to stir up trouble, they thought. See what those town people are doing to you, they said. They did it on purpose to frighten you, so you wouldn't hide your grain and bury your potatoes. And you think it's bandits from the woods that killed her, fools that you are. Just you go on doing what the town people tell you. They've got a lot more up their sleeves, they'll take everything, they'll starve you out. If you want to know what's good for you, then listen to us, we'll teach you some sense. When they come to take away what you've earned by the sweat of your brow, tell them, we haven't so much as a grain of rye, let alone surpluses. And in case of trouble, use your pitchforks. And anyone who's against the village had better look out. Well, the old fellows talked and held village meetings, and that was just what Karlam wanted. Off he went to the town with his tale. Fine goings on in the village, he says, and what are you doing about it? A poor peasants' committee, that's what we need. Give the word and I'll have them all at each other's throats in no time. Then he made off somewhere, and never showed up in our parts again. What came after happened of itself. Nobody informed. Nobody's to blame. They sent Red Army men from the town, and they set up a court. And they started on me. That was because of what Karlam had told them. I'd dodged the labor service. I'd run away. And I'd killed the old woman and stirred up the village, they said. They locked me up, but luckily I thought to pull up one of the floorboards and get away. I hid in a cave in the old quarry. The village was burned over my head, I never saw it, and my own mother drowned herself in a hole in the ice and I never knew. It all happened by itself. They'd put the Red Army men in a house by themselves and given them liquor, and they all got dead drunk. In the night the house happened to catch fire, and the fire spread to the other houses, from one to the next. Our village people, when it started, jumped out of their houses and ran away. But the people from town, mind you, nobody set fire to them naturally, they were all burned to death. Nobody told our people to run away or to stay away from their burned-out homes, but they were afraid that something else would happen. The kulaks spread a rumor that every 10th man would be shot. When I came out of the cave, they'd all gone. I didn't find a soul. They're wandering around somewhere. 5. The doctor and Vasia arrived in Moscow in the spring of 1922 at the beginning of the NEP. The weather was fine and warm. Sunshine glancing off the golden domes of the Church of the Saviour played on the square below where grass was growing in the cracks between the paving stones. The ban on private enterprise had been lifted and trade within certain narrow limits was allowed. Deals were made on the scale of the turnover of a rag and bone merchant in a flea market. Their pettiness led to speculation and abuses. No new wealth was created by these transactions and they did nothing to relieve the squalor of the town, but fortunes were made out of the futile reselling of goods already sold a dozen times over. The owners of several modest private libraries got down their books from their shelves and collected them all in one place. They notified the town Soviet of their wish to start a cooperative bookshop. They applied for premises and obtained the use of some shoe store or florists, which had been empty and closed down since the first days of the revolution, and there, under its spacious vaults, they sold out their small haphazard collections. Professors' wives who, when times had been hard before, had secretly baked white rolls and sold them in defiance of the regulations, now sold them openly at some bicycle repair shop or other which had been requisitioned and left unused all these years. They changed sides, accepted the revolution, and no longer used their genteel language. In Moscow, Yurii Andreyevich said, "You'll have to work at something, Vasia. I'd like to study. That goes without saying. Another thing I want to do is draw my mother's picture from memory. That's a good idea too. But for that you'd have to know how to draw. Have you ever tried? When I was apprenticed to my uncle I used to play around with charcoal when he wasn't looking." Well, why not? We'll see what can be done. Vasia did not show any great talent for drawing, but he had enough aptitude to enter a school of industrial design. With the help of his friends, Yurii Andreyevich got him into what had been the Stroganov Institute, where he first took a course in general subjects and then specialized in printing, binding, and book design. The doctor and Vasia combined their efforts. The doctor wrote booklets on various subjects and Vasia set them up and printed them in small editions, as part of his training at the institute. They were then distributed through the second-hand bookshops that had been recently opened by their friends. These booklets contained Yurii Andreyevich's philosophy, his views on medicine, his definitions of health and sickness, reflections on the doctrine of evolution, his theory of individuality as the biological basis of the organism, and thoughts about religion and history, which had much in common with those of his uncle and Seema, as well as his poems, short stories, and sketches of the Pugachev country he had visited. They were written in an easy conversational style, but were anything but works of popularization, since they advanced opinions that were controversial, hypothetical, and untested, though always lively and original. The booklets found an easy sale among collectors. In those days everything became a specialty, including versification and the art of translation. Theoretical studies were written on all possible subjects, and institutes were founded right and left. There arose all sorts of palaces of thought, academies of artistic ideas. Yurii Andreyevich acted as medical consultant to half of these pseudo-cultural institutions. For a long time he and Vasia remained friends and lived together. During that period they moved from one dilapidated place to another, each uninhabitable and uncomfortable in a different way. Immediately on arriving in Moscow, Yurii Andreyevich had revisited his old home in Sivtsev Vrajok, He was told that his family had not stayed there when they returned to Moscow. After their deportation, the rooms registered in their name had been given to new tenants and there was not a sign of their belongings. Yurii Andreyevich himself was avoided by his former neighbors, who regarded him as dangerous to know. Markel was no longer there. He had gone up in the world and had been appointed house manager at Flower Town. The manager's flat had been put at his disposal, but he preferred the old porter's lodge, which had floors of beaten earth but which also had running water and an enormous Russian stove. All the pipes and radiators in the buildings burst in the cold weather, but the porter's lodge was always warm and dry, and the water did not freeze. There came a time when the friendship between Yurii Andreyevich and Vasia cooled. Vasia had developed remarkably. He no longer thought or spoke like the ragged, barefoot, disheveled boy from Varetaniki. The obviousness, the self-evidence of the truths proclaimed by the revolution attracted him increasingly. And the doctor's language, with its obscurities and its imagery, now struck him as the voice of error, doomed, conscious of its weakness and therefore evasive. The doctor was making calls on various government departments. He was trying to obtain the political rehabilitation of his family and permission for them to return to Russia. At the same time he applied for a foreign passport for himself and permission to bring his family back from Paris. Vasia was astonished at how lukewarm and half-hearted his efforts were. Yurii Andreyevich seemed always to be in a hurry to decide that he was not getting anywhere, and he spoke with too much conviction and almost with satisfaction of the futility of undertaking anything further. Vasia found fault with him more and more often, and although Yurii Andreyevich did not take offense at being justly criticized, his relationship with Vasia gradually deteriorated. Finally their friendship broke up, and they parted company. The doctor left the room that they had shared to Vasia and moved to Flower Town, where Markel was all-powerful and had set aside for him a corner at the back of what had been the Sventitskys. It consisted of a derelict bathroom, a room with a single window adjoining it, and the dilapidated, crumbling kitchen and back entrance. After he had moved in, Yurii Andreyevich gave up medicine, neglected himself, stopped seeing his friends, and lived in great poverty. 6. It was a grey Sunday in winter. Smoke was rising in columns from the roofs and in thin black streams from the windows, which, in spite of the regulations, were still used as outlets for the metal pipes of stoves. The amenities of town life had still not been restored. The tenants of Flower Town went about unwashed and suffered from boils and colds. As on every Sunday, Markel Shapov and his family were all at home. They were having dinner at a large kitchen table. At this same table in days gone by. At the time of the bread rationing. All the tenants' coupons were collected and cut, snipped, counted, sorted, and wrapped in pieces of paper or tied into bundles according to their category before being taken to the baker's at dawn. And here too, later on in the morning, the loaves were cut and broken and crumbled to make up each tenant's apportioned weight. But all this was now only a memory. Food rationing had been replaced by other forms of control, and the Sh Chapovs at their midday meal ate their fill and champed and chewed with relish. Half the room was taken up by the broad Russian stove, which stood in the middle and had bedding on its flat top and quilts hanging down over the sides. Near the entrance was a faucet, and here the pipes were not frozen. Benches ran down two sides of the room. Under them were kept the family belongings in trunks and bundles. The table was on the left and had a plate rack fixed above it. The room was very hot. The stove was going full blast. In front of it stood Markel's wife, Agafia. Her sleeves were rolled up above her elbows and she was using a long pair of tongs to move the pots inside the oven, crowding them together or spacing them out according to need. Her sweating face was in turn lit by the blaze in the oven and misted over by steam. Pushing the pots to one side, she pulled out from behind them a pastry on an iron sheet, flipped it over, and put it back to brown. Yurii Andreevich came in with 2 buckets. "Good appetite. Make yourself at home. Sit down and have dinner with us." "Thank you. I've had mine." "We know what you call dinner. Why don't you sit down and have something hot? You needn't turn up your nose at it, it's good stuff, baked potatoes, pie with kasha." "No thanks, really. I'm sorry to keep on opening the door and letting in the cold. I want to take up as much water as I can. I've cleaned the bathtub, now I'm filling that and the wash tubs. I'll come in half a dozen times and then I won't trouble you again for a long time. Forgive me for bothering you like this, but I can't get water anywhere else. Help yourself. If you ask for syrup, we haven't got any, but there's plenty of water. Take as much as you like, we won't even charge you for it." They all laughed.